Let me introduce Professor Robert Hayden, who came from Pittsburgh. Actually, he came from Serbia, but you know, he's from the University of Pittsburgh. He's an anthropologist of law and politics. His research focused on Balkans, but he has also done some research in India among Seneca Iroquois of the New York state. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly. In the Balkans, he did ethnographic research on nationalism, constitutionalism, well, this word, transitional justice issues, state reconstruction. And between 2007 and 2013, Professor Hayden has had an interdisciplinary project on competitive sharing of religious sites, which, as I read, analyzed data from Bosnia, Mexico, Peru, Portugal, and Turkey. So it has been conducted in different settings. His new research, as I understand, stems from this project and includes studies of Sufi orders in post-imperial settings. You can add anything to that. That's what Magda helped me prepare, and big thanks for Magda Lubańska, who suggested inviting you and arranged for that. That's her. Well, we need to thank her for having you here today. So, okay, the floor is yours, and we have like around 45 to 15 minutes for lecture, and then another 15 to 20 for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivana. Well, thank you all very much, and I understand that you've come from a very important set of discussions about things happening at your university. It won't be any comfort, but it's happening to people at lots of universities all over the world. So you're not alone. It's not specifically Polish, but there we are. Anyway, I want to thank you all for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. My previous time in Poland was 36 hours in pure university diplomacy, talking in English to guys in suits. And I'm talking in English now, but we're not in suits. So it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be here at the Institute, because looking through what you're all doing, and I knew about some of the research, it's really a pleasure to be in such a large and active institution, and also a European institution with anthropologists who don't work only in Europe, but have worked and are working in other places. This you do not find in Southeastern Europe, where I've been hanging out. So, thank you very much. Competitive sharing of supposedly indivisible sacred sites. I hope I will make sense. I prepared a presentation and notes as to what I was going to say, but they don't show up on this computer system. So I have to look at my slides and figure out what it is. Okay, what was I going to say when I showed that slide? With that in mind, let's try to move forward. Yeah. Okay, I picked this particular image to start with because if you work in India or know anything about India, which I do and have done, it's very jarring. And it's very jarring because you have a Shaivite saint, a saint who's a follower of Lord Shiva. You see that with the iconography, and that's very Hindu. And yet underneath are inscriptions in Arabic, and it's not quite clear whether it's Urdu or Persian, and it's not clear because it's been painted over so much. And that's on a shrine in central India that I'll be talking about. But it's very striking because to have a very Hindu image, and it's actually in current India, it's a very aggressively Hindu image, accompanied by Islamic themes in Urdu and Arabic, possibly Persian, has not been common since 1990, 92, when a mosque in Ayodhya, which is a city in north-central India, a mosque in Ayodhya, which you see here in 1900, it was built in the 16th century. You see it here in 1900, in 1950, just after Indian independence. in December of 1992, a mass, hundreds of thousands of Hindus attacked the mosque. They swarmed the mosque, and they literally tore it apart. It was a massive stone structure, and with bare hands and hand tools, they tore this thing apart. And they tore it apart in the name of Hinduism. Their claim was that the mosque had been built by the Emperor Aurangzeb on the site of a temple that was the birthplace of Lord Rama. And so they were reclaiming this site for Hinduism. And what they proposed to do is rebuild a temple to Rama precisely on the place where the mosque was being destroyed. The BHP Foundation is a very Hindu, it's a very aggressive Hindu organization. So that was what they were claiming. They were reclaiming this for Hindus, and that has been part of the politics of contemporary India for the last 20 years. This very aggressive Hindu nationalism. And you see the plastered throughout India, signs like this. This is a different mosque, Ganpati Mosque, built by Aurangzeb after destroying the original Kashi Vishwanath temple on the site. And then India is the only country which preserves the trespasses of invaders as historic monuments. People interested in cultural heritage take note, right? This is a very interesting view of heritage. And it's been a very successful one in electoral politics because the attacks on mosques, symbolizing attacks on Islam, which also take place because they attack Muslims, but the attacks on the mosques are the key symbolic efforts in building aggressive Hindu nationalism, and it's actually worked quite well. The hero of hatred, who was so involved in all of this, is now the Prime Minister of India. So that's been very successful. And they continue to do this. They appointed this chap who is very far to the right-wing spectrum of Hindu politics, Chief Minister of the state of Uttar Pradesh in northern India. The state of Uttar Pradesh has a population that is half the size of the population of the European Union. So it's enormous. And as he is saying, as that mosque you just saw, as the guy in Vapi Mosque has Hindu deities, will install Gauri Ganesha, a Hindu deity, in all mosques, thereby converting them into temples. And this is now the guy who's chief minister, effectively governor of the state. Heritage again. He's also said that the Taj Mahal is not Indian heritage. Well, because it was built by Muslims, and therefore is not Indian heritage. And so in the state that he now runs, the tourist brochures and the like have dropped off the Taj Mahal, right? So, okay, so there's some very interesting things going on here. I mean, we can view them as intellectually interesting. They're absolutely horrifying. I mean, I've been doing research in India, I don't even want to say how long, but it's been more than 40 years, and it's a very different country than the one that I used to go to. But it's not only India where this is happening. This, of course, is a view of well, you can call it the Temple Mount or the sacred shrine, depending on whether you're Jewish in the first case and Muslim in the second, in Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. And it's the highest point in the city of Jerusalem, and so it's visible from all over. And of course, it is the site of two of the holiest places of Islam, the so-called the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque are two of the holiest sites of Islam. And so the site is very much of a Muslim site, and it's controlled largely by Muslims. You can visit it. You can wait in very tight, long security lines. You can visit it, and you do. And you know, it's normally very calm and peaceful. And you walk around, and there's Al-Aqsa Mosque there and on the side. But sometimes you can come, and you'll find these chaps wandering around. And these are very right-wing Jewish activists who are trying to claim the site because the Temple Mount, it has the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa, but until the Romans knocked it down 1900 years ago, it was the site of the first and second Jewish temples. And so there will be demonstrations by very, I won't say orthodox because they're not necessarily, but they're very right-wing extremists in Israel. And this tends to produce violence. These folks get defended by the Israeli police, which the Palestinian police who are keeping control of, they tend not to like very much. And so unfortunate things happen. And then the goal of those folks is to reestablish the second temple on the location of the Dome of the Rock, and they seem to be serious about it. This chap is the American ambassador to Israel, and he managed to have a picture taken, and of course the American embassy said that they never intended this, with this chap who's holding a picture that's been photoshopped to rebuild the temple on the site, right? And that is something that would not happen without a great deal of violence. So we're getting these things, these conflicts over very important sacred spaces, and then how do you deal with them intellectually? Well, of course, as anthropologists, we know that political scientists are always willing to come up with models, and we also know as anthropologists that they tend to be empirically wrong. I used to get invited to political science conferences because I would do constitutional law stuff, and I discovered that if you want to upset political scientists, toss in the word liminality. They've never heard of it. When you explain it to them, they get very uncomfortable because it blows away the integrity of their models, right? So next time you're dealing with political scientists and you want to make them upset, just invoke liminality. It works every time. So in any event, but we have then political scientist, a guy from Stanford, of course. That's sacred spaces, of course. I mean, they're going to be the site of conflict because they cannot be subdivided. They have clearly defined inflexible boundaries. They're unique sites for which no material or spiritual substitute is available. And because disputes about sacred space involve religious ideals, divine presence, absolute transcendent value, there's no room for compromise and no substitute for the disputed space. Which, of course, the right-wing Hindus in Ayodhya would say, and the right-wing Israelis would say as well in their efforts to take over space currently being controlled by others, saying, no, this is always inherently ours, must be always inherently ours. And the political scientists say, well, they can't be subdivided, they can't be shared. Now, anthropologists know this not to be true. We know this to be empirically false. There are anthropological studies, a number of anthropological studies now of places which are in one way or another shared, at least in terms of the presence of peoples from differing religious communities using the same space, sometimes even at the same time. This is a place in Makedonski Brod, Macedonia, a very interesting small church of St. Nicholas, which is also the Hadar Baba Teke. So it's a small Orthodox church, and you can see the Orthodox iconography on the walls, but it's also being used by Muslims, and it's being used by a variety of Muslims. It's being used by Sunni Muslims. It's being used by Bektashis. It's being used by Mevlevis, and they're coming to this thing. And this is actually pretty well-known site. They don't do it at the same time, but they do leave up each other's iconography to a certain extent, which is kind of interesting. So it's a church, a Christian church, that's being used by Christians, but the Christians let Muslims use it as well. So you can see that type of thing. This is the site where my opening slide came from, of the Shiva saint with the writing underneath. This is in the middle of nowhere, central India, a place called Muddy. It's between Ahmednagar and Aurangabad, if that tells you anything, and if it doesn't, it's the middle of nowhere. It's a very interesting place. It is the tomb of a saint, defined, if you ask the Hindus who it is, it's Kanifnath. Kanifnath is one of the Nath saints of central India. There are a bunch of them, and Kanifnath was a student of Jalindranath, and if you look on the hill behind, you can see Jalindranath's temple, and so he's a particular type of Hindu Shaivite saint. And if you ask the Muslims, they say, oh, the saint is Shah Ramzan Mahisavar. Sometimes they add Chisti, which would make him a Sufi. And interestingly, they say, well, yeah, everybody agrees he was born a Hindu who converted to Islam. And he converted to Islam, and yet he maintained a lot of the elements of a Hindu saint. So he's born a Hindu, he gets sacred powers, he studies the gurus and gets sacred powers, including the power to fly, which if you're really good you can do. He's flying over a nearby town, the sacred town of Paitan. And a Muslim holy man senses somebody above him. Well, that means that somebody is in a superior position, and the Muslim holy man doesn't like it very much, so he takes off his sandal and aims it up there and knocks down the guy who's flying. Now, this is very demeaning, to hit somebody with your sandal. The Hindu holy man, having been brought to the ground, says, I should learn the powers of the Muslim holy man. So he converts to Islam, becomes a Muslim, and yet very few Muslims have acted so much like Lord Krishna, because he keeps his cow and he plays his flute, even as a Muslim holy man, and goes to the river every afternoon with his cow and playing his flute. And this is Lord Krishna, people. This is what this is. And even to the point of when his Muslim fellows decide to play a trick on him by killing the cow and cooking it into a rice pulao. When he wonders where his cow is, he plays his flute and the meat comes out of the pulao and reconstitutes itself as a cow. And boy, that, I mean, for Hindus, saving the life of a cow is a good deed. It's the ultimate good deed, bringing a cow back. So anyways, it's a very interesting place, and you get both Muslims and Hindus coming. And if the light were down, you could see it a little bit better. But on the biggest festival of the year, you bring long poles with flags on them to the saint. You do this to saints in central India. It would be a long lecture on maybe why. Just accept it. And you can see green, color of Islam, and saffron, the color of Hinduism, sometimes on the same pole, which is unusual. And the tops of virtually all of the poles, even those with only saffron flags, have a crescent, right? Which is associated with Islam. So this is a very syncretic shrine with lots of interesting things going on. And when I first saw it in 1976, well, I'll get back to it. I'll get back to that. So that's being shared. Sharing can take other forms. This is in Bulgaria, just outside of Sofia, and it's an Orthodox church. Again, I don't have my presenter view, so I'm not quite sure what the first slide is. I've changed the presentation several times. I get back to my Indian site later. Here, this is about forms of sharing. Behind that Orthodox church is a little turbe, a tomb of a saint. And this is Bali Effendi. And again, Magdalena, this one's for you. if you go to the Turbe, you look in the window, and it says here, don't light candles, pray to Allah. And Muslims in the Balkans light candles when they pray to saints, and Sunni religious establishments go crazy because they say you're not supposed to do that. But of course, what are people doing? They're lighting candles, right? Some of the people lighting candles are Christians. But this is Bali Effendi. And this gets interesting too, because it's the church, the temple of the sainted prophet Ilya, who's an Old Testament prophet, and of course so he's known to the Muslims as well. And the holiday of the temple of Saint Ilya's Day is the 20th of July, and so the Christians come to the church on the 20th of July. And the Muslims come on the 2nd of August, which is the 20th of July under the old or Christian calendar. So it's actually a site that, of course, there used to be a mosque where the church is. The Turbe has remained. The site is shared, but not at the same time, which complicates things, and is shared by combining the iconography. I'll just say, anthropologists have done a lot of work on this type of thing, and these are books put out in collections. All of them are collections. And the most recent one is by a couple of historians, actually. Well, Karen Barton's a sociologist, I was a botanist, I was a historian. Choreographies of sacred sites. And the general anthropological explanation for how it is that sites get shared is they're not favoring people like Glenn Bowman and Dina G. Alberta are framing this idea of choreographies, that the people who control these places take great care to organize their activities so that they don't insult each other and don't get in each other's way. And that works really well at these sites until something happens from outside to upset the equilibrium. And then, of course, things can fall apart. All right? And that's it. And so you do ethnography to document the separate choreographies on the separate sites. Sound good? Anybody ever read Radcliffe Brown? Isn't that structural functionalism? That, you're looking at the social interactions on these local places, and it all keeps reproducing itself until there's some type of intervention from outside, and then things either fall apart or at least change dramatically. And it fascinates me that actually there's an inherent structural functionalism in a lot of anthropological theorizing. And when I tell Glenn Bauman, who's fortunately a good friend, even though we fight in print all the time, that he's a structural functionalist, he goes crazy. But it's a structural functional model, and it really is. Everything is going to, it's Manchester School, right? They have all these connecting ties, and everything is fine until, the evil politicians come in and mess things up. I said, yeah, okay, I think I read that before. I think I read it in graduate school, but I think it was written 40 years before I got to graduate school. It's been out there a while. And I didn't think that did it. So I put together a research project that went from basically 2007 till 2014. We got the book out in 2016, and a lot of articles in between. The antagonistic tolerance research group. And as you can see, it was a large team that was both international and interdisciplinary. So, you could view us as several anthropologists, several archaeologists, a historian, an art historian, a specialist on religious studies. You could view us also as a couple of Americans, a couple of Turks, a Bulgarian, a Mexican, an Indian, and a Serb, working on religious sites that were at various times shared, at various times contested. And the various times is important because while we were looking at religious sites, the religious sites were the main foci of our research, we were looking at them as indicators of trajectories of relations between communities that define themselves regularly and pretty reliably as self and other. You know, hey, we're us, and you folks are you folks. Their primary distinguishing characteristic is that they are of a different religious heritage, and we'll say that. They'll say that they're of a different religious heritage. They rarely officially intermarry, but they live intermingled. Now, it turns out that is a type of situation that is very common from South Asia through the Middle East, actually into many parts of Europe, recently in some places still, and in other parts of the world. Religious sites became important because these folks interact relatively peaceably as long as it's clear that one group is dominant. Or perhaps all of them are being held under the dominance of a larger power. Colonialism is great for that. But when dominance is clear, then relations are quite peaceful. When dominance is threatened or changed, then you make it violence. And dominance is indicated by the control of key religious sites. So we put this on the cover of the book. Anybody have any idea where that might possibly be? Where do you get a Gothic cathedral that's been turned into a mosque? Has to be either Cyprus or Crete. Well, because you had the Venetians building Gothic cathedrals, and then you had the Ottomans coming along and turning them into mosques. And you have this in Cyprus, and you have it in Crete. This one happens to be in Cyprus. But you can do this in many places. So we developed this antagonistic tolerance model, drawing on two meanings of the word tolerance in English. One of them is the earlier ones. It comes from John Locke, letter on toleration. Toleration from the Latin root tolerare, to endure, to put up with. One still gets this in medicine. You know, one can tolerate chemotherapy or not. The letter on toleration by Locke was advising a Protestant king not to repress Catholicism. That, oh no, it's terrible what these Catholics do, but, pardon me, Catholic country, it's terrible what these Catholics do, but repression brings rebellion, and is extremely expensive in all ways, monetarily, politically, morally. So you should endure it. You should put up with them. And this is actually the original model of toleration. The other model comes with Mill. And Mill says, no, tolerance is a philosophical argument, not a political one. Tolerance requires the embrace of that which is different, the embrace of the other. Now, interestingly, at least in contemporary English, it's the second meaning that seems to be dominant, that you're looking for, the embrace of the other. But I think it's very difficult to actually find that second meaning manifested empirically. The first meaning you can find quite a lot. Enduring the presence of the other, but not embracing it so long as one group is clearly dominant over others. Dominance is indicated in part by control of the primary identity of major religious sites. So you can see the definition that we were using. It's a punctuated equilibrium model. And if you want to think of how this can play out in a couple of very obvious examples, until May 29th, 1453, the largest Christian church in the world was the Hagia Sophia. And then as of May 30th, 1453, that is suddenly the largest mosque in the world. And remains, but if you go about 200 years earlier to Cordoba, right? I mean, the great cathedral of Cordoba has within it the Mosque of Cordoba, which underneath the Mosque of Cordoba is the Gothic Christian church that was there when Muslims took Iberia. Underneath that is the Roman Christian temple, underneath that is the Roman pagan temple. Actually, in a lot of primary sites, you'll find these incredible stratigraphies. One of our favorite places in Ankara, in the oldest part of Ankara, if you go there, what you notice is a huge temple to Augustus. It's 15 meters high. But if you pay attention, the oldest things that you see are remains of a Phrygian goddess temple, which when the Romans conquered it, they turned into a Roman temple to the Phrygian goddess. Then Augustus builds a temple to himself and God, and it's 15 meters high. It's got the Res Gestae. It's fantastic. That was turned into a church, but then along cometh Islam, and a mosque is built that literally intersects the building in one place. And then there's a Muslim saint involved in it as well. Even though Sunni Islam doesn't tolerate saints, they can't get rid of this guy. He's the patron of Ankara. It actually drives the Sunni theologians crazy, but they can't get rid of it. It has some other things that go with it. The orientation of the mosque is, the mihrab does not actually face Mecca, but it does face the tomb of the saint, which is pure sacrilege. And nobody's written about it. And nobody's written about it because people who study the Roman temple see the mosque as intrusive. Why would they care? People who study the mosques see the temple as just kind of something that's just kind of there. But actually to understand, literally the structures, but to say nothing of the dynamics that go on. The first time we visited the site, my Turkish colleagues and I, at the end of the day, is a man standing in a very Sunni prayer posture facing the Roman temple. What the hell is going on, right? Which is tied with the saint site, you see. So you have to fit all of this stuff together, which means that you have to get out of the strictures of any single religious literature, wherever you think that might take you, but also any single community. So you can't just look at the Muslim sites in isolation from the Christian ones, in isolation from the Roman ones. But we keep trying to do that. So the innovations that we have, or other anthropological work, was we coined a term of intertemporality. We would never look at a site at a single historical moment, a single ethnographic present, because we knew that there would be elements of that site that predate that ethnographic present. There would be other elements that would go past it. And so we were studying how the site developed, trajectories of time, how the features developed, and how those were seemed to be related and indicators of relations between the communities. And part of the relations between communities, we coined another term, religioscapes. Scapes, everybody's got scapes up at their eye since then. But it's not really viable to analyze a single site as if it were isolated from other places. They're not. A mosque is one of a network of mosques and masjids, turbes, and the like in an area, and is treated like that by Muslims. It may, so it's part of a Muslim religioscape, it may be next to a temple or a church or a synagogue, which those buildings themselves being part of networks of temples or churches or synagogues, forming another religioscape, which you can sketch out. Sometimes the religioscapes intertwine, sometimes they overlap, sometimes they're adjacent. When they overlap, it gets very interesting because then you can have a place that is a node on more than one religioscape. My shrine in India, the shrine in central India, as far as the Muslims are concerned, it's a Muslim site connected to other Muslim sites, connected to the same saint and other Muslim sites. As far as the Hindus are concerned, it's a Hindu site connected to other Hindu sites of the Hindu saints, right? And it makes these nodes connect. Now, under what circumstances can they connect? when do you get a conversion? It ceases being part of one religious state and becomes part of another. So that's what we're looking at. And when they're shared is when they are intersecting. And the really great British anthropologist archaeologist Hassner had described such ambiguous shrines 100 years ago, writing in the Balkans, and found them to be to occur when the political relations with the community, between the communities, are in a state of equilibrium. And that if it tips one way, it becomes a mosque. If it tips another way, it becomes a synagogue or a church or something. And so they're shared and they're creating equilibrium, which gets to the dominance. The locations and features of each community's shrines relative to those of the other community provide markers of relative dominance or subordination. What types, and distinctive religious Constantinople starts out with all churches. Actually, there were 2 mosques before 1453 for additions from Muslims. A 1422 map, they're all churches. And by an early 19th century map, they're all mosques. Right? And actually, you can sketch out the, May 30th, 1453, there's only one mosque, and it's the Hagia Sophia. The rest of the churches remain. Actually, the conqueror, calls back the Greeks and says, no, you get to keep your churches, I need you folks, come on back. Then over the period of the next several centuries, all of the churches are slowly converted into mosques or destroyed, with the single exception of number 37 up here, which is St. Mary of the Mongols, a very small Orthodox church. It's the only church in Istanbul that was an Orthodox church in 1453 that's never been converted. And at the time, it was on the outskirts of the city, which is important, and it was and is small. It's low. It's not very noticeable. And I say this because if you're looking for indicators of dominance, perceptibility of the buildings is a key indicator of dominance. Features that make religious sites more notable might include superior height, size, monumentality, ornateness, color, material used, audibility. A minaret is a sound amplification system. You can carry the azan, the call to prayer, much more widely from a minaret than you can from ground level. A church bell tower is a sound amplification system. And actually, we've got some folks who are working on competitive soundscapes these days. But of course, they also mark through the height, which is something we get to. And if you want to see this, Sarajevo, one of the earliest mosques in Sarajevo, the Emperor's Mosque, built in 1462, and very noticeable. It's a very big building, and it's quite ornate, and it's quite high. Note the Serbian Orthodox Church. It was a Serbian Orthodox population primarily in the small town of Hassner before it became Sarajevo. Serbian Orthodox Church was very small, very low, not ornate, could not have a bell tower. The bell tower gets built after the Ottomans have left, because the Ottoman Empire permitted Christian and Jewish structures, but they had to be low. One traditional phrasing was lower than the vision of a Turk on a horse. Some of them they dug into the ground to make them both big enough and low enough. There's one like that in Skopje, Macedonia. And in principle, you could not build new churches. You could only repair them, so there are actually very few until the Tanzimat in the 19th century. But as a comparison, these are right near each other, very near each other. So yes, they were tolerant in the Jarmalakian sense. The Muslims are very tolerant. The Ottomans are very tolerant. They would let the Christians do their thing as long as it did not in any way even symbolically threaten the Muslims. Centrality as well. Centrality in a in a settlement or a city. And we developed some rules. Perceptibility is relative to other structures, obviously. In context is defined by centrality. Why do I look down this way? Sorry. Assuming equal centrality, greater perceptibility indicates dominance. Assuming greater centrality. The building that is central indicates dominance. Now you can get that of a subordinated community that's pretty large and even pretty high as long as it's not central. And you can see this in various parts of the Balkans, and for that matter, various parts of India, and for that matter, various parts of colonial Peru. Let me play this out a little bit. At this shrine in India that I had the first picture, and I had the picture of the various flags. These are pictures taken in 1927, and it was clearly a Muslim tomb. It was clearly a Muslim dargah. And the pictures were taken in 1927 as part of a court case, because the Hindu community had made a claim to be able to use the site because they were claiming that it was actually, their saint, Nath. And so they took it, and this is British India, so they take it to a British Indian court. It's British India. It's colonialism. As far as the colonial regime is concerned, they don't care as long as the locals are not fighting. And so what British courts did was acknowledge some legitimacy to the Hindu claim. So the Hindus in 1931 decision get the right to use some parts of the site. By the next time it's visited, the next picture we have is from 1976 by the late Wunderdiet Sontheimer, German anthropologist. And if you went to the place, the domes were green, which is the color of Islam, and they had crescents on top of them. So it looked very much like a Muslim shrine. And if you went into it, there was a green cloth covering the tomb of the saint. And it was described by several anthropologists as a place of marvelous syncretism, because both Muslims came and Hindus came, and Hindu priests and Muslim Maoris were officiating. They never worked together, but they coordinated their activities, choreography, right? So that they didn't get in each other's way, but it looked for all the world like a Muslim shrine to which Hindus were coming. And that was actually the first time I was out there, and this is what you saw. And marvelous, everybody getting along, right? This is really shared. But of course, always, if you ask the Hindus, who's the saint? Nath. If you ask the Muslims, who's the saint? Shakramzar Mahesavar. Well, but the Hindus say he was born a Hindu. Yeah, of course he was born a Hindu, the Muslims would say, but he converted to Islam, obviously. And the Hindus would say, yeah, well, he converted to Islam because he knew Muslims were going to rule, so that was more convenient, but, he really remained a Hindu. But everybody got along. But when I got there in 1992 again, which was more or less by chance, I was doing another project, I thought, damn, that's interesting. These domes have become orange, which is the color of Hinduism. And you can see that they are, and they're actually little Om signs sketched onto them. And you have a very ambiguous thing up here. It's no longer purely a crescent. It has a third thing in it, so it's not exactly a trident of Lord Shiva, exactly, but it's kind of somewhere between a trident and a crescent. And what had happened was that Hindu activists from Mumbai, which is about 150 kilometers away, had come in, and they had transformed the place, and they had taken off the green cloth and replaced it with an orange one from the tomb, and then they'd taken down the Bismillah from the wall and replaced it with some shlokas, and some Sanskrit shlokas, and they did some other things to make it look for all the world now like a Hindu site that Muslims were still going to, right? So, and there was a great deal of legal activity that was going on, and in fact, in 1992, I had a young research assistant, a new PhD from the University of Pune in anthropology, a Muslim guy. Local Muslims gave him a court file that went back to the 1880s, and they had been fighting about control over the shrine in courts in British India and then in independent India for more than a a century. And through time, the Hindus acquired more and more control over the site. So I Googled it in about 2012 and saw this. I said, now that's interesting. And went out to the site with the film. We have a film on this, actually. And if that's what I'd seen in '92, now when you approach it, it looks like this. And you've got this thing on it. And with the colors and that design like that, it's a totally Hinduized shrine. There is almost no visible evidence left of its status as a Muslim shrine, except those inscriptions that were in my first slide, which they haven't removed, but they put the saint above them. Well, I found this a very interesting trajectory, because were the anthropologists who were writing in the 1970s about, oh, this wonderful place where everybody got along, this great choreography and the like, were they wrong? Well, they weren't wrong about that particular ethnographic present, right? But they were absolutely dead wrong in their explanations of it, which wasn't just because everybody was working so hard to get along. It was because in secular India, Nehru's India, Gandhi's India, the state was still not standing on the side, particularly of any party, as India became more and more driven, and Maharashtra, the state specifically, was an early one of these, by Hinduism, by Hinduized politics. Then the Hindus get more power and take over the site. And it gets even more complicated than that, because there are other sites dedicated to the same saint. They're not as prominent, they're not as central in this case. And you can go to those and they still look the way they did in the 1990s, and they still have the saint presented as a Muslim. And there's a great deal of richness there if you play out the religioscapes. But you have to play them out in time, and you have to play them out in space as well. And you can never then treat a particular place as an isolate in an ethnographic present, and as if it were a local community cut off from the rest of the world. They never were, they never are. So you get this. Another I could run through in India. This is Mathura, south of Delhi. When I first went there in 1978 during the Anthro meetings, big mosque, big temple next to each other. You could pull up, you can go to either. That was all fine. But actually the mosque had been built by Aurangzeb again. He had torn down a temple to do it. It was the only thing that was there in the 1940s. In the 1950s, Hindus started to rebuild the temple. And they don't try to take down the mosque to do it, but they do it in an interesting way. Here's the mosque. They started building a temple right here. If you know anything about Islam, this is the mihrab wall. So your prayers to Mecca are being relayed by Lord Krishna, which is really a very shrewd move. And of course, by this stage of the game, you can no longer to get from the temple to the mosque, you can't just come down one set of steps and go up the other. You have to get into a vehicle and you have to go about 4 kilometers around. And because there's this incredible fence between them, and when you get to the mosque, the security is the strictest I've ever seen in India. We had a couple of women, a Turkish woman and an Indian woman, and they came out, they were searched by police women, and they came out and said, we've never been searched like that before in our lives. And you can't take in anything electronic. You can't take in a phone, you can't take in a camera, you can't take in anything. And it's eerie, it's completely abandoned. And riots take place. Sometimes people get killed. And so, but this is part of this dynamic of the rising Hindu politics of India. If I go back to this place, it didn't just happen one day in December 1992. There was several years worth of political preparation, political campaigning, preceded by the Raj Yatra, a mass march across India in 1992, going all the way through India to wind up at Ayodhya to build momentum to destroy the mosque. And of course, people were killed. Their Muslims would object in these various places, and people were killed. But the politicians doing that, as far as they're concerned, that's fine. That helps build the momentum. And as I say, as it worked, our hero of hatred has become the Prime Minister of India. But, interestingly to me, the whole thing had been in the courts since 1950, and a court case, the High Court of Allahabad, made a very interesting decision. And the decision was that on this site where the mosque had been, the Hindus would get about 2/3 of it, including the most desirable parts of it. But the Muslims would still get about 1/3 of the site. Now, to me, I mean, that is your competitive sharing. But it's gone from being a site that looked to be predominant and was predominantly Muslim to a site that has become predominantly Hindu, and yet the Muslims are still recognized. They will still have a presence, but the domination is now clear. So, you know, and you can see some of these things happening. Are sites like this indivisible? If I go back to the Dome of the Rock, the sacred shrine, 18th century, 19th century, its identity is pretty clear. But if you look at the Temple Mount, you know, there's this western wall. It is part of the site. It is part of the site. And for all the period of Muslim dominance, it's been a part of the site that has been controlled by Jews and used by Jews. And in fact, is considered to be one of perhaps the single most sacred site for Jews. These are Ottoman era pictures from the 19th century. So this site actually has been shared, but not shared equally. And shared under circumstances in which the Jews are kept low down and on the periphery. And even that, acknowledging, in a sense, the subordination. The chief rabbinate has said that it's forbidden for any person, being a Jew, to enter the area of the Temple Mount because of its sacredness, because you don't know where the temple actually was, thus you don't know where the holiest of holies was, thus an unauthorized person could move in. That doesn't bother the folks who are trying to take it over now. But what are they trying to take over? This is a state insignia. This is a state insignia. The claim of the state of Israel is that Jerusalem is and has always been the eternal capital of Israel. And can you have the eternal capital of Israel being Jewish if the single most visible place in the whole damn city is controlled by Muslims? And that's your question. And it's a political question. It's not a religious question. Because Judaism has succeeded for 1900 years without that temple. And it's hard to envision, even if they were to rebuild that temple, would they really be going back into animal sacrifice and burnt sacrifice? One kind of finds this, having eaten at a vegan Israeli restaurant last night, I kind of wonder about that. But anyway, but it's a purely political question that's being garbed in religious arguments, but they really make no sense. Judaism does not require control of this area. Israel's claim over Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, as a Jewish state, that requires it. And that's a different thing. Not uncommon, the Parthenon, speaking of visible places, starts as a temple of the palace Athena, becomes an Orthodox church, was briefly a Catholic church, becomes a mosque for the Ottomans. This was actually a contemporary of mine. The reason it's blown up was that in the siege, the Venetian siege of Athens, it was, the Muslims were on the top of the Acropolis, and there were gunpowder in there and a shell went in and the thing blows up, remained a mosque through the Ottoman period. This is actually, well, it's a line drawing from one of the very earliest photographs ever taken. It was a daguerreotype, actually, and from 1839, right after Greek independence. And you can still see, the mosque. But of course, it's the single most visible site in Athens. And so control of that is going to be indicated by control of the site. Of course, when Greece gains independence, you get effectively ethnic cleansing. And so the mosques, some of them were converted into churches, not very often actually, but some. So Greece is strewn with Ottoman-era mosques that are remaining there because those populations have left. Anyway, to sum up, with the political science model that sacred sites inherently cannot be subdivided or shared is empirically simply flat dead wrong. Okay? And it's one of those nice things where anthropologists can say, you know what, guys? You're wrong about that. Empirically, you're wrong. Here are the case studies. So we can do that, even though it's a very influential model. If you talk to the policy people, say, oh God, these religious sites, they can't, nothing can be done about them. Yeah, politically, you're right. And that is wrong even in regard to some of the most important cases, notably the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, but also I would argue Ayodhya. The Temple Mount has been shared, just not shared equally, and with Jews in a subordinated position. Until 1967. Anthropological and historical models that explicitly recognize sharing of sites are better, but they are themselves limited to structural functional analyses of specific cases and ethnographic presence, which lack both the larger political context and the trajectories of developments of the sites analyzed. But on the other hand, they're not really models. As old as I am, I trained in a form of anthropology as a social science in which ethnography was considered to be a method, not an end, not a goal, a method for acquiring information. This seems to be ethnography as inspirational tale, as morality tale, actually. And missing from all models is consideration of relationships between the communities involved, of dominance, subordination, and contestation. The single greatest predictor of conflict is increasing relative political strength of a community that has been subordinated. That's your greatest predictor of conflict. The claims by leaders of the community to control religious sites that community has not controlled for centuries, that's simple aggression. That's political aggression. Being cloaked in religious arguments. It's not actually a religious issue, it's a political issue. And with that, I will end, except I always like to explain my backdrops. Anybody have any idea what that might possibly be? Well, the Hagia Sophia was converted from the greatest Christian church into the greatest mosque. In the 1930s, secular Turkey had it converted into a museum. And a picture was taken by the Americans doing the conversion that was meant to show the thickness covering the Christian mosaics. It didn't occur to them that they should document the mosque as a mosque. It just didn't occur to them. There are 3,400 photographs. They never document the mosque. I have a Turkish colleague and I who are working on this. So that's what was being covered. But there were Christians doing this. They were trying to restore it as a Byzantine building. And so as far as the Turkish state in the 1930s, Ataturk state, Ataturk was aggressively secular. He had to destroy a Muslim power structure. And so he went along with that. And so uncovering the Christian era remnants of Hagia Sophia was in a sense another conversion of the building into a secular scape. But that would be the part of another lecture. It does give us wonderful photographs. I hope I've shed some light on this. They did a series of light studies in Hagia Sophia in the 1930s where the light goes at dawn. They're utterly fascinating. So I'll leave that up to illuminate any discussion. And thank you for listening.